19 hours. The timestamp on Warden Tessavane's urgent transfer authorization pulsed with the aggressive red hue of a Level 1 biological containment emergency. I stared at the flashing digital signature on my terminal, my respiratory membranes fluttering in absolute, unadulterated panic. We had just filed a maximum security orbital relocation request, deliberately stripping away all standard procedural rights, for an unarmed infrastructure technician whose only previous offense was repairing colonial waste pipes. He was currently sitting in holding cell 4, politely asking if our facility had a decent coffee machine. We had just invented a brand new threat classification solely for him. The part that made me file a formal complaint with the Galactic Zoological Board? That comes later. You will want to hear exactly what was in his biological file. 19 minutes earlier, Declan Frost arrived at my intake desk in Detention Block Vorith. I have personally processed over 4,000 prisoners of war during this territorial dispute, cleanly categorizing the usual spectrum of frightened combatants and aggressive dissidents. Frost was neither. He was merely an Earthborn plumber caught near the border, waiting patiently while my assistant initiated the standard biometric intake scans. He did not test the atmospheric shielding, nor did he glare at the armed guards stationed by the reinforced doors. He simply sat in the sterile metallic chair, radiating a terrifying, unnatural level of calm that immediately unsettled my secondary ocular receptors. I placed the primary cardiovascular diagnostic array against his chest to establish his baseline resting metrics. His heartbeat registered on my console with a slow, heavy rhythm, pulsing steadily at exactly 62 beats per standard minute. I logged the data as normal, completely failing to understand the monstrous implication of that number. Frost casually lifted his hand, using his opposite thumb to meticulously scrape invisible flecks of metallic grime from beneath his fingernails. He was treating a military incarceration facility with the bored detachment of someone waiting for public transportation. My internal logic faltered as I analyzed the readouts. If his resting equilibrium requires absolutely no metabolic adjustment for this environment, then a forced exertion would. "Do you have a yard here?" The question broke my train of thought. Frost looked up from his fingernails, offering a mild, entirely non-threatening expression. "Like a track?" he continued, gesturing vaguely toward the holding cells. "I like to keep moving. Gets the blood going, you know?" I informed him, with required institutional severity, that this was a detention facility and not a recreational environment. I then asked him to state his maximum distance capability for the mandatory yard privilege classification log. He chuckled softly, leaning back and resting his hands behind his head. "Depends. Flat surface? Good shoes? I ran a marathon once for charity back home. That is about 42 kilometers. Took me maybe 4 hours." I stared at him. 42 kilometers of continuous forward locomotion. My assistant's luminescent scales flared bright warning yellow as she desperately began cross-referencing Earth's evolutionary databases. Frost was completely oblivious to the rising terror in the room. I looked at the number blinking on the main terminal. 160 kilometers of continuous locomotion. His species hunted by absolutely refusing to stop. They simply followed their target, walking and jogging for days, until the prey's biological systems catastrophically failed from sheer exhaustion. The human was still moving when the prey collapsed. I looked back at Declan Frost. He was still sitting perfectly still, 62 beats per minute on the cardiac monitor. He possessed a physical chassis designed for distances our absolute elite soldiers cannot even conceive of, and his internal rhythm was slower than mine while I sat reading his file. My assistant leaned slightly toward the armed guard stationed at the reinforced door. I heard her whisper softly, "He doesn't stop. His species hunted by not stopping." They followed until the prey died of exhaustion. The guard tightened his grip on his kinetic rifle and looked at the human. Frost was currently inspecting a scuff mark on his boot. "How fast?" the guard asked. "It doesn't matter how fast," my assistant replied. "That is the point. Speed is entirely irrelevant. He just doesn't stop. I reopened his capability file and cross-referenced the persistence predation data with our facility's escape protocol assumptions. Every single containment model we operate under is fundamentally based on sprint pursuit dynamics where the faster species successfully escapes or the faster guards successfully apprehend. A persistence predator breaks this model entirely. He doesn't need to outrun the guards. He just needs to start running. We will tire. He will not. I calculated the yard access risk. The math was terrifying. If Declan Frost entered the detention yard and began moving, our guards could pursue for approximately 800 meters before cardiovascular failure protocols would force them to stop, whereas he could continuously run for 160,000 meters. To possess the biological architecture to outlast a mechanized transport vehicle, yet willingly confine oneself to a career repairing waste pipes, implies. I contacted the Warden immediately. The notification triggered an automatic, facility-wide suspension of all standard escape protocols, prompting a paralyzed emergency review board to frantically request Earth's complete evolutionary dataset from the Galactic Zoological Authority, while simultaneously flagging the entirely oblivious Plumber for immediate maximum security orbital relocation. Declan Frost was officially transferred at 0900 hours under heavy, extremely nervous escort. He stood up from the intake chair and raised his arms above his head, executing a deep, jaw-cracking yawn and a full-body stretch to relieve the stiffness of transport. The sudden, audible popping of his skeletal joints made two armed guards visibly flinch. He went quietly, completely cooperative, pausing only at the primary airlock to ask me if the new orbital facility might have better coffee. I told him I honestly did not know. "Fair enough," he said, offering another massive yawn. "Bit of a boring morning, honestly." Boring. He had caused a complete institutional security freeze and a facility-wide protocol rewrite in under 19 minutes. He thought it was boring. The Warden's finalized transfer report includes a brand new threat classification code that did not exist before this morning. Pursuit Class Biological. We invented the category exclusively for an infrastructure technician from Earth who wondered if we had a recreational track. The final biometric log is permanently attached to his file. 62 beats per minute at intake. 62 beats per minute at transfer. The cardiac monitor captured the impossible truth of a persistence predator in perfect stasis. He was not being patient. He simply did not need to be fast. He just needed to start.